The station fell silent the moment the killer stepped through the docking gate. Not the ordinary silence of exhausted workers ending a shift. Not the peaceful quiet that sometimes drifted through the upper observation decks when travelers stopped to stare at the stars. This was different. This was the kind of silence that arrived before catastrophe, the kind that pressed against the lungs, the kind that made instinct whisper run before the mind even understood why. Khepri Station had survived pirate sieges, reactor breaches, and political assassinations. It was a monstrous ring of steel and neon orbiting a dying blue star at the edge of civilized space, a place where every species in the galaxy came to disappear. Smugglers traded stolen weapons beside luxury diplomats. Mercenaries drank beside refugees. Music from 20 alien cultures blended into a constant electric hum beneath the station's endless artificial rain. The air always smelled faintly, of ozone, machine oil, and overheated circuitry. But now, all of it stopped. The music died first, then the conversations. Then even the holographic advertisements flickering above the docking bay seemed to hesitate, their bright colors stuttering across the wet metallic floor. Docking Ring 12 stood frozen beneath rows of crimson warning lights as the gate doors slowly parted with a hydraulic hiss. And he walked through, tall, slow, deliberate. The figure wore a black combat cloak that moved like liquid shadow around layers of scarred armor. No insignia, no visible weapons. He did not need them. The silver mask covering his face reflected the terrified crowd in distorted fragments, dozens of frightened eyes trapped inside polished metal. Some beings immediately lowered their heads, others physically backed away without realizing they were moving, because everyone knew the stories. Varkros the Pale, the ghost of Orpheus Prime, the man who once executed an entire royal bloodline during a peace negotiation and vanished before the bodies hit the floor. Rumors surrounded him like smoke. Some claimed he hunted targets for sport across star systems. Others swore he could smell fear chemically, like a predator tracking blood through water. Entire colonies had surrendered after hearing he was approaching. Security forces collapsed at the mention of his name alone. And now he was here. A glass slipped from a trembling alien bartender's hand and shattered against the floor. Nobody reacted. Nobody breathed. Even the station security drones hovering near the ceiling quietly drifted backward, their threat scanners pulsing red in frightened confusion. Varkros continued forward with slow mechanical footsteps echoing across the docking bay. Clang, clang, clang. Each sound seemed heavier than gravity itself. A child near the transit elevators began crying before her mother covered her mouth in panic. Somewhere deeper in the crowd, someone whispered a prayer in a language almost lost to time. Traders abandoned crates full of credits and contraband alike, inching away as though movement alone might provoke death. The killer never rushed. That was what terrified people most. He walked like a man who had never once feared resistance. Then suddenly, a laugh cut through the silence. Sharp, human, completely out of place. Heads turned instantly toward the station bar overlooking the docking ring. Neon light reflected off half-empty glasses and cigarette smoke drifting through dim blue haze. Sitting there, boots propped lazily against the counter, was a human male wearing an old brown military jacket with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, scarred knuckles, relaxed posture, a grin that bordered on insanity. He looked directly at the approaching killer and laughed again. Louder this time. Not nervous laughter, not drunken laughter. The laughter of someone who genuinely found the situation amusing, and for the first time since entering the station, Varkros stopped walking. Khepri Station drifted through the darkness like a wounded god refusing to die. Built around the fractured skeleton of an ancient mining colony, the orbital city circled, a collapsing blue star whose fading light painted the station in permanent twilight. From a distance, Khepri looked beautiful, rings of gold and silver rotating slowly against the void, thousands of illuminated windows glittering like artificial constellations. But up close, beauty gave way to survival. Steel plates groaned beneath decades of patchwork repairs. Steam leaked from overloaded vents. Entire sectors smelled of burnt wiring, engine coolant, and recycled air pushed through systems far older than anyone still living aboard. It was the kind of place where desperate people came when the rest of the galaxy stopped asking questions. Cargo freighters drifted endlessly through the outer docking lanes while patrol drones floated between them like silent predators. Neon signs written in 20 different alien languages reflected across rain-slick corridors. Somewhere deep below, the commerce district's illegal cybernetic surgeons replaced organs beside black-market weapon dealers selling plasma rifles hidden beneath medical crates. Every hallway carried noise, gambling dens roaring with laughter, engines humming through the walls, distant arguments echoing in untranslated dialects. And tonight, all of it felt tense. Like the station itself knew something terrible had arrived. Inside docking ring 12, the atmosphere hung heavy with static and fear. Travelers who had moments earlier crowded the bars and transit rails now stood scattered at a careful distance, whispering quietly while pretending not to stare toward the lone human seated near the observation windows. Commander Elias Ward. At first glance, he didn't look impressive. No polished armor, no military escort, no visible weapons besides an old pulse pistol holstered carelessly beneath his jacket. He sat alone at the edge of the station bar with one boot resting against the rail, slowly turning a glass of amber liquor between scarred fingers. The neon lights above flickered across his weathered face. Dark circles beneath tired eyes, faded, burns near his jawline, silver threading through short brown hair. He looked less like a legendary soldier and more like a man who had survived too many wars to care about appearances anymore. But appearances on Khepri meant nothing, especially when it came to humans. The bartender, a four-armed Vaishon with nervous yellow eyes, kept glancing toward Elias while polishing the same glass repeatedly. "You should leave," the bartender muttered quietly. "Before station security locks this sector down." Elias smirked faintly without looking up. "If security could handle this," he said, "they wouldn't be hiding behind blast doors already." The bartender said nothing after that, because he was right. Beyond the massive observation windows, security cruisers had begun repositioning. Around the docking ring, emergency shutters waited half open above nearby corridors. Armed response teams clustered nervously near choke points, too afraid to advance but too proud to retreat. News traveled fast in places like Khepri, and the rumors spreading through station channels had already infected every deck. Varkros, the Pale, was here, and somehow, the human wasn't afraid. That unsettled people more than the killer himself. Elias finally took a slow sip from his glass, eyes drifting toward the docking gate where frightened crowds still lingered at a distance. His reflection stared back from the rain-covered window behind the bar. Older now, more tired. But beneath the exhaustion, something colder remained alive inside him. Recognition, memory, war. His fingers tightened slightly around the glass. 20 years ago, on the burning ruins of Titan Reach, Elias had watched entire platoons die screaming in the snow while a silver-masked monster walked calmly through gunfire. He remembered the bodies, the silence afterward, the impossible feeling of helplessness. Most people spent their lives praying never to meet nightmares. Humans were different. Humans survived them. And as the distant sound of slow metallic footsteps echoed through docking ring 12 once again, Elias leaned back in his chair and smiled like a man finally seeing an old ghost return home. Fear spread through Khepri Station faster than fire in an oxygen leak. It moved through whispers first, then glances, then panic. Within minutes of Varkros entering docking ring 12, emergency chatter flooded every civilian frequency on the station. Transit lines shut down without explanation. Cargo elevators froze between sectors. Storefront security shields slammed into place one after another with metallic crashes echoing through the corridors. Above the station streets, holographic advertisements dissolved into warning sigils as automated systems quietly shifted into containment mode. Nobody announced the danger publicly. They didn't have to. People could feel it. Across the crowded commerce district, entire groups abandoned meals mid-conversation. Smugglers hurriedly concealed weapons beneath coats while wealthy diplomats vanished behind armored escorts. Somewhere in the lower engineering decks, a riot broke out after rumors. spread that the docking ring was about to be sealed permanently. Fear had become a living thing now, moving through Khepri's veins like poison. And at the center of it all, the human kept smiling. Commander Elias Ward sat alone at the station bar while chaos unfolded around him like distant weather. He watched reflections of fleeing civilians ripple across the rain-streaked observation windows beside him. Neon blues and violent reds flickered over his tired face while alarm sirens pulsed faintly somewhere deeper in the station. The bartender leaned closer, voice shaking. "You don't understand," the Veshan whispered. "That thing isn't a mercenary. It's death." Elias took another slow sip of amber liquor. "I know exactly what he is," he replied quietly. That answer chilled the bartender more than the alarms, because humans weren't supposed to sound calm when speaking about Varkros. Nobody did. Entire military fleets altered routes to avoid crossing paths with the assassin. Frontier colonies surrendered fugitives without negotiation at the mere threat of his arrival. The stories surrounding him had become mythology, bloody, impossible mythology, whispered in war zones and refugee camps. A survivor from the Valoran Purge once claimed Varkros walked through plasma fire untouched, while executing soldiers one by one. Another swore he could hear heartbeats through walls. Others believed he enjoyed fear more than killing itself. Most terrifying of all, the stories were usually true. Heavy footsteps echoed again through docking ring 12. Clang, 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 slow, precise, mechanical. Each sound silenced another section of the crowd until the docking bay resembled a mausoleum filled with breathing corpses. Armed station. Security officers stood near barricades with rifles raised, but none of them advanced. Their targeting lasers trembled visibly across the floor. One officer quietly removed his helmet, revealing sweat pouring down pale blue skin. No one wanted to be first. At the far end of the bay, Governor Talvek monitored everything through a reinforced security viewport high above the docking ring. His clawed hands shook as he barked orders into a communication panel. "Seal every exit. Lock this sector down immediately." "Governor," a technician stammered, "there are still civilians inside." "I said seal it." Blast doors began sliding into place throughout the district with thunderous force. Metal screamed against metal. People started running. Panic finally broke the paralysis. Alien civilians shoved past one another toward narrowing corridors while overhead drones repeated evacuation warnings in multiple languages. Children cried. Someone fired a weapon accidentally. Another scream erupted near the transit rails as crowds crushed together in desperation. And through all of it, Varkros kept walking calmly toward the human at the bar. Elias watched him approach through the haze of smoke and flashing red emergency lights. His expression never changed. But beneath the table, his fingers slowly flexed once against old scars lining his knuckles. Memory crawled through him like cold fire. Snowstorms on Titan Reach, broken soldiers bleeding into frozen trenches. The silver mask appearing through the blizzard while gunfire failed to stop it. Elias remembered the fear, the helplessness, the rage. He also remembered surviving. The assassin stopped only a few meters away now, towering over the shattered silence of the docking ring. Civilians stared from behind barricades and overturned tables waiting for blood to spill. And then Elias leaned back in his chair, looked directly into the mirrored face of the galaxy's deadliest killer, and laughed again. Varkros stopped directly in front of the human. For a moment, the entire docking ring seemed suspended, outside of time itself. Emergency lights pulsed slowly overhead, washing the metallic corridor in deep crimson flashes. Steam drifted from ruptured vents near the ceiling. Somewhere far off, automated sirens continued screaming evacuation warnings, in distorted loops, but nobody moved anymore. Civilians, smugglers, station guards, even hardened mercenaries, stood frozen behind barricades and overturned cargo crates, staring at the impossible sight unfolding before them. The killer and the human. Face to face. Varkros towered over, Elias Ward like a shadow carved into human form. Up close, the assassin's armor looked ancient, scarred black plating etched with burn marks and deep fractures from battles that should have killed him years ago. Thin streams of rainwater dripped from the edges of his silver mask, reflecting fractured neon light across the station floor. Then he spoke. "You find this amusing, human?" His voice was cold, mechanical, not loud, but heavy enough to silence the air itself. Elias remained seated at the bar, one elbow resting casually against the counter, glass still in hand, a faint grin still hanging on his face. "No," Elias answered softly. "I'm laughing because they sent you." The reaction was immediate. Confusion rippled through the docking ring like a shock wave. Nervous whispers erupted among the watching crowd. Even station security exchanged uncertain looks behind their rifles. Nobody spoke to Varkros that way. Nobody mocked him and continued breathing afterward. But the assassin didn't strike. He simply stood there, motionless behind the silver mask. Elias slowly reached into the inner pocket of his weathered military jacket. Dozens of weapons instantly locked onto him from every direction. A station. Guard shouted, "Don't move!" Elias ignored him. From his pocket, he removed something small and blackened by fire. A military insignia, Old Earth Alliance, burned around the edges. The moment it touched the counter, Varkros froze. Not physically at first. It was subtler than that. A slight shift in posture, a microscopic hesitation in the tilt of his head, but Elias saw it instantly. Recognition. The human rolled the insignia slowly across the metal bar until it stopped beneath the station lights. "You remember this?" Elias asked quietly. Silence. Then, for the first time since arriving on Khepri Station, Varkros took a single step backward. The crowd gasped collectively. Governor Talvik stared in disbelief from the upper security deck. Guards tightened grips on their rifles. Somewhere in the distance, a terrified civilian whispered, "Impossible," because nobody had ever seen the assassin retreat. Not once. Elias finally stood from his chair. Slowly, calmly. The old joints in his body cracked faintly as he straightened, to full height. Compared to Varkros, he looked painfully ordinary, older, smaller, exhausted by years of survival. Yet something about the way he carried himself now changed the atmosphere entirely. The humor was gone from his eyes. Only memory remained. "Titan reach," Elias said. The words hit like artillery fire. Images clawed instantly through his mind. Snowstorms swallowing burning trenches, human soldiers screaming into frozen darkness, bodies scattered across crimson ice beneath orbital bombardments, and through the chaos. A silver mask walking calmly through machine gun fire. That was 20 years ago, Elias continued. 40 men in my unit. Veterans. Good soldiers. His jaw tightened. "You killed every one of them." Varkros remained silent. But Elias noticed something beneath the assassin's stillness now. Tension, not fear, not yet. But uncertainty. The human stepped closer. "You know what the funny part is?" Elias whispered. Rain hammered violently against the observation windows behind them. Emergency lights flickered harder now, bathing both figures in alternating darkness and blood-red light. "You never checked the bodies." The station seemed to stop breathing. Even Varkros's mask reflected something new now. Not superiority, not calm, but realization. Official military records listed Commander Elias Ward as dead for 2 decades, lost during the siege of Titan Reach alongside the rest of his strike team. Yet here he stood, alive, laughing, waiting. And for the first time in decades, the galaxy's deadliest killer understood something horrifying. He had not come to Khepri Station to hunt prey. He had walked willingly into the presence of the one survivor who remembered exactly how to kill monsters. The lights died without warning. 1 second, docking ring 12 burned beneath flashing crimson emergency signals. The next, darkness swallowed everything. A wave of terrified screams erupted across the station. Then came the sound. Shh. metal slicing through air. A station guard near the barricades collapsed before anyone even saw the blade move. Sparks exploded from shattered security drones overhead as bodies scattered in blind panic. Civilians trampled one another, searching for exits while alarm sirens dissolved into distorted static. Somewhere beyond the chaos, plasma rifles opened fire wildly, their blue muzzle flashes briefly illuminating fragments of carnage through the blackness. And inside the storm of confusion, Elias Ward smiled, because this was exactly how Varkros hunted. Fear first, darkness second, death last. The assassin moved through shadows with inhuman speed, appearing only for fractured moments between weapons fire. A silver mask here, a black cloak there, bodies hitting the floor seconds later. Station security never stood a chance. Their training collapsed beneath primal terror as officers fired at ghosts and echoes instead of targets. But humans came from a death world, a world where survival depended on adapting faster than the nightmare chasing you. Elias closed his eyes. Not out of fear, out of memory. He listened beyond the screams, beyond the sirens, beyond the panic flooding the docking ring. Breathing, footsteps, movement. There. A shift in air pressure behind him. Elias moved instantly. The assassin's blade slashed through empty space a fraction too late as the human twisted sideways and grabbed Varkros's wrist with brutal force. The impact rattled both men across the floor. Nearby civilians screamed and ducked behind shattered tables as Elias drove his forehead directly into the assassin's silver mask. Crack. For the first time, the crowd heard Varkros grunt in pain. Shock spread across the docking ring. A human was actually fighting back. No, worse, he was winning. Varkros retaliated violently, slamming an armored knee into Elias's ribs hard enough to crack bone. Pain exploded through the human's chest. His vision blurred instantly, but instead of retreating, Elias laughed again, hoarse, exhausted, almost insane. "That all you got?" he growled through bloodied teeth. The assassin attacked with terrifying precision now, abandoning stealth entirely. Twin monomolecular blades flashed beneath emergency backup lights as he drove Elias backward through the ruined station bar. Bottles exploded. Glass rained everywhere. Tables splintered apart beneath impact strong enough to dent reinforced steel. Elias barely kept up. Varkros was faster, cleaner, more efficient. But humans were never built for efficiency. They were built for endurance. Every strike that shattered Elias's body only pushed him harder. Every wound dragged older memories to the surface. Titan reach burning beneath orbital fire. Soldiers screaming in frozen trenches. 40 good men dying while he lay buried beneath corpses pretending to be dead. 20 years of hatred ignited, inside him like a reactor breach. Varkros lunged forward for the killing blow. Elias stepped into it. The blade pierced straight through his shoulder. The crowd gasped in horror, but the human didn't stop moving. Ignoring the agony tearing through nerves and muscle, Elias grabbed the assassin by the throat with both hands and drove him backward across the docking ring like a runaway engine. Metal buckled beneath their weight. Security barriers shattered, apart as the two crashed through the station floor toward the panoramic observation deck overlooking open space. Warning sirens screamed instantly. Hull breach detected. Cold vacuum winds exploded into the corridor as fractures spread spiderweb-like across the massive glass viewport behind them. Varkros finally looked uncertain. Elias saw it and smiled through blood. "You should have checked the bodies," he whispered. Then he slammed the assassin headfirst into the observation window. The glass shattered, explosively. A hurricane of decompression tore through docking ring 12 as air, debris, and bodies were violently dragged toward open space. Civilians clung desperately to support rails while alarms reached deafening volume. Varkros clawed for stability, but Elias never released him. For one impossible moment, both men stood against the stars themselves. Then Elias roared with everything humanity had left inside him, and hurled the galaxy's deadliest killer screaming into the void. Emergency sirens screamed through the hollowed remains of docking ring 12 long after the fight ended, not because the danger was still present, but because the station didn't yet understand it was over. Cracked viewport panels groaned under pressure locks as automated systems fought desperately to stabilize the breach. Thick emergency shutters slammed into place one after another, sealing off ruptured corridors while red warning lights pulsed like dying heartbeats across the wrecked station. The artificial gravity flickered in uneven waves, making loose debris drift and fall in slow, unsettling arcs through the air. Outside the shattered observation deck, space stretched endlessly, cold, silent, absolute. Stars burned without mercy, indifferent to the violence that had just spilled against their backdrop. And somewhere beyond the fractured glass, the void swallowed what remained of Varkros the Pale. No explosion, no dramatic final scream, just absence. As if the galaxy itself had quietly erased him. Inside the docking ring, survivors slowly emerged from hiding places that seconds ago had felt like graves. Civilians clung to overturned tables and fractured railings, breathing in ragged, disbelieving gasps. Security officers stared at broken weapons in their hands as though unsure why they were holding them at all. Smoke drifted lazily through shattered neon lights, painting everything in shifting shades of blue and red ruin. And at the center of it all stood Elias Ward, still alive. Barely. Blood soaked through his torn military jacket, dripping steadily onto the fractured floor beneath his boots. One arm hung useless at his side, shoulder destroyed where the assassin's blade had pierced through him. His breathing was uneven, sharp, controlled, forced through pain that would have crippled most species outright. Yet he remained upright, staring through the broken viewport where the void still shimmered with drifting debris. The silence around him was different now. Not fear, not panic, something heavier. Understanding. A station medic finally broke through the stunned crowd, rushing forward with a trauma kit in trembling hands. "Commander, your injuries." Elias raised his remaining hand slightly. The medic stopped, not because of authority, but because of expression. Elias wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the stars, at the place where monsters went when they finally lost their shape. Behind him, distant systems continued trying to restore order. Emergency protocols cycled endlessly. Damage reports flooded command channels. But none of it mattered yet. The station had witnessed something it would never fully process. A human standing alone against a legend written in fear across half the galaxy. And winning. Slowly, Elias turned away from the shattered viewport. His eyes scanned the ruined docking ring, the overturned tables, the scorched walls, the terrified survivors still watching him like he might disappear if they blinked too hard. Then, unexpectedly, he let out a low breath that almost resembled laughter. Not the wild laughter from before. Something quieter. Exhausted. Real. Still. Overrated, he muttered under his breath. A few nearby aliens blinked in confusion. One of them, braver than the rest, finally asked the question everyone was thinking but too afraid to voice. "Is it really over?" Elias paused. He looked once more at the void beyond the broken glass, at the emptiness where Varkros had vanished. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said simply, "that one is." A long silence followed those words. Not the terrifying silence from the beginning, a different kind. The kind that comes after survival, after impossible things stop being impossible, after fear finally learns it can be killed. Elias staggered slightly as pain finally caught up with him, one hand gripping the edge of the shattered bar for support. The medic rushed forward again, this time catching him before he collapsed fully. But even as he was held upright, even as alarms slowly shifted from red to amber, Elias kept his gaze fixed on the stars. Because somewhere out there in the cold vastness of space, the galaxy had just learned something it would never forget. Humans did not stop when they should die. They stopped when the threat finally did.